Kill them all. Those were the 3 words Oninda Romelus allegedly muttered before she pulled the trigger. She didn't target strangers. She didn't target enemies. She targeted her own 4 children, sitting right there in the family car. Oninda Romelus sat in a jail cell for months, the weight of what she'd done to her 4 children hanging over her in total silence. But then she decided to speak. And what she told the world wasn't a confession of hate. It was something far more disturbing. According to court documents, when investigators asked Oninda why she had called 911, she allegedly said, "Instead of them doing it to me, I'm going to do it to them." When they asked what she meant, she allegedly answered, "Kill them all." She also made statements about the devil. She said things that did not appear to connect with the reality of 4 wounded children sitting in front of emergency responders. And that is where this case becomes more than a crime story. It becomes a question no family ever wants to face. How does a mother described by some as overwhelmed, isolated, and struggling reach the point where prosecutors say she turns a gun on her own children? How did 4 children end up in a car, in the early morning hours, with no one able to stop what was about to happen? And were there warning moments before that morning that someone somewhere could have taken more seriously? As we tell this story, remember this. These children were not side details in their mother's case. They were the center of it. Today, we're breaking down the Angleton shooting and the exclusive interview that reveals the fractured mind of a mother who thought she was saving her children by ending their lives. So tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe stories involving children, family violence, and missed chances for intervention should be told with honesty and respect, subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories. Because some stories are not just meant to be heard. They are meant to make us pay attention.
31-year-old Oninda Romelus is accused of shooting all 4 of her children early Saturday morning. Investigators say she drove nearly an hour from her home in Porter to this gas station in Angleton and then called 911.
We need multiple ambulances.
You can hear the officers' urgency as they uncover a tragic scene. 13-year-old O'Carroll Covington had been killed, and 3-year-old Amara Chappelle also died in the back seat.
We're doing first aid. We're doing everything we can.
Officers rushed to help the 2 surviving children, 9-year-old Kyle Romelus and 8-year-old Traviel Donner. Both were airlifted to Memorial Hermann Hospital fighting for their lives. Meanwhile, their mother was taken into custody, and what she allegedly told investigators is chilling. When asked why she called 911, court documents said she told investigators, "Instead of them doing it to me, I'm going to do it to them." When asked do what, she reportedly replied, "Kill them all." She also told investigators she didn't call 911. She called the devil.
Before this case becomes about charges, court documents, statements, and evidence, it has to begin where it truly belongs. With the children. Because the 4 children inside that vehicle were not just part of a crime scene. They were not just ages listed in a report. They were siblings. They were sons and daughters. They were young lives moving through the world with routines, needs, fears, laughter, arguments, school days, family ties, and futures that should have stretched far beyond one early morning in Angleton, Texas. There was a 13-year-old boy, old enough to understand more than the younger children around him, old enough to notice when life was difficult, old enough to possibly feel the weight of being the oldest child in a home where things were not always stable. At 13, he was still a child, but he was standing at the edge of his teenage years. The age where boys begin imagining who they might become, what kind of life they might build, and what kind of person they want to be. That future was taken from him. There was a 9-year-old girl, a child still young enough to need protection, comfort, and reassurance, but old enough to remember moments, faces, voices, and fear. She survived what happened that morning, but survival does not mean the story ends cleanly. She was found injured, alive, and in need of urgent medical care. Her life was spared, but it was changed in a way no child should ever have to carry. There was an 8-year-old boy, another young child inside that vehicle, another life nearly taken before it had even begun to fully unfold. He too survived. He too was rushed for emergency treatment. And like his sister, he was left with a future shaped by a moment that should never have happened. Then there was the youngest, a 3-year-old girl. At 3 years old, a child is still learning the world, still learning words, still reaching for comfort, still trusting the adults around them completely. A 3-year-old does not understand danger in the way adults do. A 3-year-old does not know how to protect herself from the person responsible for protecting her. She did not survive. And that is one of the hardest truths in this case. For children entered that morning together. Only 2 came out alive. And even for the 2 who survived, the word survived can feel painfully incomplete. Because survival is not the same as being unharmed. It does not erase the terror of what happened. It does not erase the loss of a brother and a sister. It does not erase the fact that the person accused in this case was their own mother. That is why this story is not simply about a woman accused of violence. Oninda had ties to Georgia before relocating to Texas with her children. Public records show that in 2022, she had contact with law enforcement in Fayette County, Georgia. She was arrested on charges that included driving under the influence of drugs, failure to maintain her lane, and possession of marijuana. She later pleaded guilty to the DUI charge, while the remaining charges were not pursued. That part of her past does not explain what happened in Angleton. But it does show that before this tragedy, Oninda's life had already included instability, legal trouble, and personal pressure. There was also an earlier public chapter in her life. More than a decade before the shooting, Oninda appeared on the television court show Paternity Court in connection with the paternity of her oldest child. That moment should not be treated as entertainment now. In the context of this case, it points to a longer history of complicated relationships, questions about support, and family strain. By the time she was living in Texas, Oninda was described as a single mother caring for 4 children. Family members indicated that she did not have strong support nearby after the move. Her father later said she had been raising the children largely on her own, though he had helped care for them in the past when they lived closer. People connected to the family described her as someone who had tried to provide for her children. One father of one of the children said he was shocked and could not understand how things had reached that point. And that is what makes this case so difficult to sit with. There may have been hardship. There may have been pressure. There may have been isolation. But none of that excuses what prosecutors say happened to those 4 children. Context can help us understand the road leading up to tragedy. It can never erase the tragedy itself. There had been at least one prior contact with Child Protective Services involving the family. The existence of that prior contact raises a hard question. Then there are the statements she allegedly made after the shooting. Those statements are difficult to hear, and even harder to understand. By the time those statements were recorded, it was already too late for 2 children. The 13-year-old boy was gone. The 3-year-old girl was gone. The 8-year-old boy and 9-year-old girl had survived, but only after being shot and rushed into emergency care. In the early morning hours of a Saturday in Angleton, Texas, most families were still asleep. But Oninda Romelus was on the road with all 4 of her children inside her vehicle. For children, enclosed in the same car with their mother, moving through the dark hours before sunrise. At some point, Oninda stopped at a gas station in the Angleton area, near State Highway 288, B and FM 521. Investigative records later showed that she purchased fuel before authorities arrived. It was an ordinary act in a setting people pass through every day. A mother at a gas station, a vehicle near the pumps, the kind of scene most people would never stop to question. But inside that vehicle, something horrifying had already happened. Around 4:45 in the morning, law enforcement received a call connected to Oninda's location. She had called for help. That alone is one of the most haunting details in this case. Because when people hear that a mother called emergency services, the first instinct is to believe she was trying to save her children, that she had discovered danger, that she was asking someone to come quickly because the threat was outside the car. But according to investigators, the threat was not outside the car. It was already there. Deputies responded to the gas station. When they arrived, they found Oninda's vehicle. And then they saw the children. All 4 of them had been shot. The 13-year-old boy was in the vehicle. The 9-year-old girl was in the vehicle. The 8-year-old boy was in the vehicle. The 3-year-old girl was in the vehicle. The scene demanded immediate action. There was no time for confusion, no time for disbelief, no time to process how a family drive had become a mass injury scene. Emergency responders had to focus on who could still be saved. The 13-year-old boy and the 3-year-old girl were pronounced dead from their injuries. The 8-year-old boy and the 9-year-old girl were critically injured but alive. Those 2 surviving children were rushed for emergency care. They were airlifted to a hospital and were later reported to be in stable condition. But stable does not mean untouched. Stable does not mean safe in the way children are supposed to feel safe. Stable does not mean they woke up from that morning without loss. Their brother was dead. Their little sister was dead. And the person accused of causing that devastation was their own mother. Authorities quickly took Oninda into custody at the scene. Investigators would later say they believed the shootings happened inside the vehicle before, or shortly before, the emergency call was made. That detail matters because it changes the meaning of the call itself. This was not a mother discovering that her children had been attacked by someone else. This was not a random shooting at a gas station. This was not a stranger approaching a family vehicle. The children had been shot while they were with the one person who was supposed to be their first line of protection. Their mother. That betrayal is what makes the final mornings so difficult to absorb. A child in a car with a parent should be able to fall asleep. A toddler should be able to rest in the back seat without fear. A teenager should not have to wonder whether the person driving the vehicle is a danger. An 8-year-old and 9-year-old should not have to be pulled from a car with gunshot wounds and taken by air for emergency treatment. Nothing about that morning was what childhood is supposed to be. And yet, by the time deputies reached that gas station, the damage had already been done. This is where the timeline becomes painfully simple. Before dawn, Oninda was driving with her 4 children. She stopped at the gas station. She purchased fuel. Around 4:45 a.m., a call brought law enforcement to that location. Deputies arrived. They found the vehicle. Inside were 4 wounded children. 2 were dead. 2 were still alive. And Oninda Romelus was arrested. There is no way to make that sequence easier to hear. There is no softer version that changes what happened. The facts are brutal because the outcome was brutal. A 13-year-old boy's life ended before he could grow into adulthood. A 3-year-old girl's life ended before she could even understand the world she was being taken from. An 8-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl survived, but the cost of that survival is something no public report can fully measure. For the first responders, it was an emergency scene. For investigators, it became a criminal case. For the court, it became charges and evidence. But for those children, it was their life. Their final moments, for 2 of them. Their worst memory for the 2 who survived. The truth is already devastating enough. A mother called for help. Deputies came. And inside her vehicle, they found the kind of scene that forces a community to ask questions long after the sirens fade. How did it reach this point? What was happening in the hours before the call? What did the children understand? What did Oninda believe she was doing? And why did no one outside that car know the children were in deadly danger until the violence had already happened? Those questions do not bring back the 13-year-old boy. They do not bring back the 3-year-old girl. They do not erase the injuries of the 8-year-old boy and 9-year-old girl. But they matter because cases like this should never become just another headline. They should force us to look at the spaces where children can be hidden in plain sight. The car at the gas station looked ordinary from a distance. But inside, for children had been failed in the worst possible way. After Oninda Romelus was taken into custody, investigators began trying to understand what had happened inside that vehicle. They had the scene. They had the children. And they had the woman accused of shooting all 4 of them sitting in front of them, being questioned about why she had called for help and what she believed had happened. What she allegedly said next made the case even more disturbing. When investigators asked Oninda why she called 911, she reportedly gave an answer that did not sound like a normal plea for emergency help. She allegedly said, "Instead of them doing it to me, I'm going to do it to them." Investigators then asked what she meant by that. Her alleged answer was direct. "Kill them all." Those words are difficult to hear because they sit beside an unbearable reality. 4 children had been shot. 2 were dead. 2 were badly injured. And the person saying those words was their mother. There was no way to separate the statement from the scene. That is why investigators had to look at every word carefully. Was Oninda describing what she believed had happened? Was she admitting intent? Was she speaking from fear, delusion, anger, panic, or some combination of all of it? Oninda allegedly made comments suggesting she believed she had called the devil instead of emergency services. She reportedly said the children were with the devil and dead. Those statements appeared deeply disconnected from the reality in front of her. Because the reality was not symbolic. The reality was not spiritual language. The reality was 4 children in a vehicle. The reality was emergency responders trying to save who they could. The reality was 2 children who would never come home. And yet, Oninda's words moved into language about the devil, death, and a threat she seemed to believe was directed at her. And this is where the legal case may become complicated. Was this an act driven by intent? Was it an act connected to a collapse in her thinking? Was there awareness of what she had done, even if her statements sounded detached from reality? Could both things be examined at the same time? The horror of the act and the possibility that her state of mind may become a major issue in court? Those are not small questions. In a jailhouse interview after the arrest, Oninda reportedly pushed back against how the public was seeing her, insisting she was not crazy and not a monster. But prosecutors have pointed to the emergency call, the scene, the evidence, and her alleged statements as part of the case against her. That contrast is what makes this case so unsettling. On one side, a mother accused of an unthinkable act. On the other, statements that appear disconnected from reality. And in the middle, for children. 2 dead. 2 alive. All harmed. The courts may eventually decide what her state of mind means legally. But the moral weight of this case was already clear inside that vehicle in Angleton. As the case widened, search warrants were also executed at Oninda's residence. What investigators reportedly found there opened another line of inquiry. Authorities discovered numerous identification documents, credit cards, and materials believed to be connected to fraudulent activity. That discovery was significant, but it has to be framed carefully. Those items were not the center of the shooting case. They did not change the fact that the most serious charges involved the deaths of 2 children and the injuries of 2 others. Still, the discovery added another layer to the picture investigators were building. It suggested there may have been other parts of Oninda's life under examination, separate from the violence at the gas station. After the shooting, the case against Oninda Romelus moved into the legal system. She was formally charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Those charges reflect the outcome for each child. Her bond was set at $14 million. That number was not random. The court set bond at $5 million for each murder charge and $2 million for each aggravated assault charge. Together, that brought the total to $14 million. A bond that high sends a clear message about how seriously the court viewed the allegations. Prosecutors were not dealing with a minor offense, a confusing disturbance, or a case that could be treated lightly. At this stage, Oninda Romelus is accused and charged. The court process had not reached a final conviction or sentencing. No final trial outcome had been publicly determined at the time of reporting. That distinction matters. The allegations are horrific. The charges are severe. The evidence described by investigators is deeply disturbing. But in the legal system, the case still has to move through court before final judgment is reached. And one issue may become especially important as the proceedings continue: Oninda's state of mind. Her alleged statements after the shooting, including comments about the devil and about the children being dead or with the devil, may become part of how attorneys argue the case. Prosecutors may point to those statements, the emergency call, the evidence, and the scene as proof of responsibility. A defense team may focus on her condition, her behavior, and whether she was experiencing a severe break from reality at the time. Child Protective Services became involved after the shooting, assessing the safety and future custody of the surviving 8-year-old boy and 9-year-old girl. Their medical treatment was only the first step. The larger question became where they would live, who would care for them, and how they would be protected after surviving the unimaginable. That part of the case should not be overlooked, because justice is not only about charges. It is also about what happens to the children left behind. Oninda Romelus' father spoke with confusion and grief after the shooting. He said he had no clear understanding of what had happened. From his perspective, the situation was beyond explanation. He also emphasized that when the children had been with him in the past, he had tried to provide them with a positive environment. That kind of statement carries a painful weight, because it suggests a grandfather looking back at the time he had with his grandchildren and trying to make sense of how their lives ended up at a gas station in Angleton before sunrise. The father of one of the surviving children also expressed disbelief. He described Oninda as someone who had previously shown care and effort in raising her children. He could not understand how events had escalated to the point where 4 children were shot. That disbelief is important, because cases like this often leave families trapped between 2 realities. In the end, this case returns to the 4 children. Not the court filings. Not the bond amount. Not the questions surrounding Oninda Romelus. The children. A 13-year-old boy who should have had years ahead of him. A 3-year-old girl who was still at the very beginning of life. A 9-year-old girl who survived, but will forever carry the memory of what happened. An 8-year-old boy who also survived, but was forced into a reality no child should ever have to understand. 2 children did not leave that morning alive. 2 children did. But all 4 were victims. That is the truth at the center of this story. Because survival does not erase harm. It does not erase fear. It does not erase the loss of a brother and sister. It does not erase the fact that the person accused was the same person who was supposed to protect them from danger. But no charge, no court date, and no headline can fully capture what was lost. A child's future is not just years on a calendar. It is birthdays that will never happen. School days that will never come. Voices that family members will never hear again. Small habits, favorite foods, favorite games, little arguments between siblings, and ordinary moments that suddenly become precious because they are gone forever. And for the children who survived, the future now carries a weight they never asked for. They deserve safety. They deserve privacy. They deserve care that lasts beyond the first wave of public attention. They deserve to be remembered not only as survivors of a crime, but as children whose lives still matter deeply. This case should make people sad, because there is no version of this story that feels easy to accept. A mother was accused. 2 children were buried. 2 children were left behind. And a family was changed forever. But more than anything, this case should make people alert. Alert to isolation. Alert to sudden changes in behavior. Alert to children who may not have the words to explain what is happening around them. Alert to families under pressure before that pressure turns into something irreversible. At Dark Trace Crime Stories, we tell these stories not to turn pain into entertainment, but to remember the victims, examine the warning moments, and ask the hard questions that too often come after tragedy instead of before it. So leave a respectful comment for the children. Share the story if you believe cases involving child safety and family crisis deserve serious attention. And subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories for more true crime stories told with facts, respect, and purpose. Because this is not just a story about what happened in Angleton. It is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous crisis is the one hidden inside a home, until it is too late.